Superman and Clark Kent may be one character, but throughout the years we have had many different faces wearing that symbol, and depending on who you ask, one of them represents the ideal Superman for them. Because Superman as a character is also a reflection of the time he exists in. Every generation reshapes him to fit what the world believes hope, justice are and should look like. And that's why conversations around Superman never really end. So in this video, I want to look at the 4 live-action portrayals that didn't just play Superman, but changed how audiences understood the character on film, from the blueprint to the reinvention to the modern rebirths. Yes, I know, there are other versions out there, TV shows, earlier serials, but these 4 stands as the cinematic pillars that shaped Superman for generations of audiences, including us watching today. So if you enjoy videos like this and expect more of it in the future, consider liking the video or subscribing. It genuinely helps the channel grow and keeps me motivated. Now, to understand Superman today, we have to start with the one who taught the world how to believe a man could fly. Throughout all of the Superman versions we have had on screen, there's one held very highly as the ideal Superman for many. Maybe it's because of his honesty, or maybe complete nostalgia plays a role. Whatever the reason may be, the dawn of Superman in 1978 became the true foundation of Superman, especially in live action. Even if he wasn't technically the first, that title kind of belongs to Kirk Allen, he was the one who truly stole the hearts of audiences and defined what Superman felt like. Released in 1978 and directed by Richard Donner, this version starred the late Christopher Reeve, a 6-foot presence who brought warmth, charisma and sincerity into the role. And what made this performance special wasn't just that he played Superman well, it was that he understood the separation between Clark Kent and Superman as performances within the same man. As Clark Kent carried these distinct mannerisms, he was clumsy, jittery, slightly hunched over, and always soft-spoken, the kind of person people instinctively always overlook. But the moment he becomes Superman, everything changes. His posture straightens, his voice becomes more stabilized, and he ensues confidence. And this scene perfectly shows that transition. Another fascinating highlight of this version is the suit itself. Wanting to bring the simplicity of Superman's character to the big screen, the filmmakers intentionally avoided overcomplications. The suit was designed to remain as faithful and straightforward as possible, bold colors, clean shapes, and nothing excessive. It emphasizes masculinity without embarrassment. And despite how objectively ridiculous a man wearing tights on the outside should look, the film never apologizes for it, because the costume isn't irony, it's borderline sincerity. Sincere in the film they're making and sincere in the character they are presenting. And yes, speaking of underwear, there was also very clear emphasis on making sure his heroic silhouette was, let's say, extremely noticeable.
Alexander Solkin pronounced very early, as we were to begin shooting, about Superman, either he has a big one or he has nothing. So they put poor Christopher in this various assortment of sizes of codpiece under the suit and the red underpants. And some days Christopher come out and he'd be out to here, which would make me go ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, priorities were clearly established in 1978 filmmaking. So now that we have covered the external basics, performance, presentation, and suit, the real question becomes, how is this Superman actually depicted? What is his core? What does he represent to the audience? The film answers this by fully embracing Superman's origin and ideals, rather than modernizing or hiding them.
I mean, why are you here? There must be a reason for you to be here.
Yes, I'm here to fight for truth and justice in the American way.
This is a concept that in today's world would make a lot of people very mad, and admittedly may sound outdated as time moves forward, yet strangely they still work. Because what the film submits intentionally is Superman's simplicity and optimism as the emotional center of the character, a belief in ideals not as political slogans but as personal responsibility, holding firm to what is right, not necessarily what society becomes, to simply be better. His origin further reinforces this interpretation. Krypton here isn't portrayed as a war to an empire or conquering civilization like later adaptations would show. Instead, it exists as an advanced, almost ideal society, one that evolved far beyond humanity. But that evolution comes with complacency. They become intellectually superior yet emotionally detached, dismissing the possibilities of their own destruction despite warnings from a scientist who studied about it.
This planet will explode within 30 days, if not sooner.
I tell you, Krypton is simply shifting its orbit.
One debt to society later.
And within this context, Jor-El's role towards Kal-El isn't to raise a god or ruler of humanity. He sent his son to Earth as a guardian, someone meant to guide, inspire, and help humanity reach its potential rather than dominate it. Superman becomes an example, not an authority. Rather than tower over humanity, he's more so presented as a friend. As an audience, what you remember isn't domination. It's reassurance. He smiles, he comforts people, his heroism is defined more by saving than fighting. And even when conflict arises, particularly in the second film, that compassion becomes something villains exploit rather than something he abandons. Power can never replace his sympathy. Although Christopher Reeve's Superman stands as the ideal for many, the franchise itself faced significant turbulence behind the scenes, continuing a pattern from Warner Bros. Of studio interferences and uncertainty towards directorial vision. That lack of patience gradually affected later installments, contributing to the franchise declining after the original film. Yet through all of that, Christopher Reeve's Superman still remained and shined bright, because beyond spectacle, effects, or production struggles, what endured was the character himself. Sincere, hopeful, and unwavering.
What does Superman represent to people?
A friend, and that's what people really need most. They don't need you know, a strong arm, you know, one-man vigilante force. They need a friend.
I just wish you could all see the Earth the way that I see it. Because when you really look at it, it's just one world.
So after the passing out of Christopher Reeve from the role of Superman after Quest for Peace, WB needed another shot at the character. So on November 3rd, 2005, WB announced another Superman film, Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer, the director of X-Men 2001 and X2. Unlike the other overly ambitious projects before it, this film wanted to go a completely different route. Not reinvention, but a kind of restoration. The route of the beloved and highly appreciated Christopher Reeve Superman. Released in 2006 and starring Brandon Routh as its Superman, whose casting was even backed by Christopher Reeve's own wife due to his uncanny resemblance to her husband. Something that was essential considering this film functions as a continuation of that version of the character. The film is set after the end of Superman 2, where Superman discovers Krypton might still exist and leaves Earth to investigate, only to find a buried wasteland with nothing left of his home. He returns to Earth after 5 years, only to realize the world had already learned to live without him. Even Lois Lane moved on.
Lois Lane is a mommy.
However, how did this movie depict Superman? Well, as much as it framed itself to be a spiritual sequel to Dawn of Superman, it lagged in so many departments, starting with the suit. And knowing Bryan Singer's tendency to ground superhero costumes, especially seen in X-Men, that philosophy really crept into the Superman as well. The bright, vibrant colors worn by Christopher Reeve's Superman were replaced with a darker, toned-down palette. The cape shifted closer to a maroon red, the trunks became smaller, and combined with the raised neckline and reduced size of the ears, it often honestly looked like he was just naked half of the time. This movie sees Superman trying to adjust to a world that has emotionally moved past him. It's about him confronting absence, trying to make up for lost times, even when people no longer need saving the way they once did. The film tackles the loneliness of Superman as truly the sole survivor of Krypton and his desperate need to rediscover belonging. Although the movie showcases his abilities, they are mostly used reactively, solving problems almost instantaneously. Rather than creating struggles or momentum, Superman feels less like an active force shaping events and more like someone arriving after life has already happened. The story ends with him throwing the Fortress of Solitude into space, foiling Lex Luthor's absolutely dogshit plan, discovering he has a son, and repeating the same hopeful words once spoken to him by his own father, Jor-El.
You will be different. Sometimes you will feel like an outcast, but you'll never be alone.
Overall, this Superman tries very hard to be like Reeves, but never quite becomes him. There is appreciation to be found when digging deep enough, but the film's emotional nostalgia and slow pacing ultimately replaces forward progression. And with the movie's disappointing performances, WB quietly scrapped every future plan for this movie, including its potential sequel. Though Brandon Routh would later reprise his role in the CW's Crisis on Infinite Earths as Kingdom Come Superman, an older, wiser continuation of this version, his era as the cinematic Superman effectively ended here, and prior to that return, Superman himself would soon be rebooted entirely with a new phase in 2013. Man of Steel is a movie many would classify as controversial, because how you feel about this film and how Superman himself is depicted in it is largely a matter of perspective. Following the massive success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Warner Bros. Wanted to quickly tap into that same shared universe momentum, which is actually a different way of me saying they just wanted all the money. This meant rebooting DC entirely, and naturally, Superman became the foundation of that new cinematic direction. Initially, Christopher Nolan was approached to direct the project, but he declined, choosing instead to remain as a producer. The directing role was then handed to Zack Snyder, known for adapting Dark almost stylized comic book stories into live action like The 300 and Watchmen. And in many ways, Snyder was the perfect contrast to what the audiences were already getting from Marvel, where the MCU embraced brightness and humor. This new DC direction aimed for weight, realism, and mythic seriousness, and Superman was chosen as the character to announce their shift to the world. Released on June 12, 2013 and starring Henry Cavill as Superman, an actor who had previously auditioned for Superman Flyby and even Superman Returns, Cavill was finally brought in to wear the cape, partly because of his persistence and partly because he fucking looks good. From the very start of the film, we are shown why this version of Superman would be fundamentally different. The opening sequence on Krypton immediately separates itself from previous interpretations. Instead of the heavenly utopian world portrayed in the Dawn films, Krypton here feels ancient, gothic, and aggressively alien. This society is flawed, burdened by class division, political failures, civil unrest, and a population stripped of free will, with citizens genetically engineered from birth to serve predetermined roles, which is actually one of the things Jor-El didn't want for his own son, even though he still told his son to be a guardian of Earth and all of that. This context becomes crucial in understanding General Zod's motivation. He isn't simply evil, he is fulfilling the purpose he was literally born for: protecting Krypton at any cost. Superman in this version is barely Superman, at least at first. He's simply Clark Kent, or Kal-El depending on what part of the movie you're watching. A man struggling to exist in a world where he fundamentally does not belong. His world isn't bright or hopeful, it is grounded, isolated, and tonally heavier than Superman Returns. Clark constantly hides who he is, drifting from place to place, trying to remain invisible. And this secrecy is heavily reinforced by his upbringing. Jonathan Kent actively rebukes the idea of Clark revealing himself or even saving others, including children, especially when he risks the exposure of his powers, even opting to die for the sake of it. However, this philosophy is completely opposed to Jor-El's belief that Clark should become humanity's guiding symbol in this interpretation to help humanity not fall into the same shithole as Krypton. That ideological conflict becomes the emotional backbone of this Superman. One of the main goals of this portrayal is clear. Distance itself from previous versions. While Christopher Reeve Superman embodied optimism and warmth, the traditional baseline of the character, this Superman is depressed. Brandon Routh in Superman Returns is boring and lacks any kind of action. This Superman makes sure to go crazy with action, punching literally anything and anyone. Even tried punching a woman. I say tried because he mostly got his ass handed to him. In retrospect, this Superman doesn't aim to be nostalgic, he aims to be different in all ways. His suit is a major highlight in this as well. It's not a classic rendering of the Superman suit, it embraces his alien heritage fully, from the textures and seams to heavily exaggerate the darker tone and realism this movie was aiming for. But contrary to popular belief, Zack Snyder actually pondered giving this Superman trunks, but it just didn't work when considering the kind of world he was aiming for, which is realistic.
Red underwear, I probably looked at hundreds of versions with the underwear. I mean, I tried, honestly.
This Superman's humanity often feels secondary because the story itself revolves around alien identity, belonging, immigration, and otherness. At times, Man of Steel plays less like a traditional Superman story and more like a first contact alien narrative. The stark contrast between Superman's need to save people is clearly cast in this depiction of Superman. As in Man of Steel, Superman practically doesn't give a shit about people. A whole truck can be thrown at him, he just weaves and aura farms in its flames. He fights through buildings and doesn't care about collateral damage. And this leads directly into the film's most most debated moment, the one time he's faced with this factor head-on to either save humans or kill Zod. He chooses to actually kill Zod. For many audiences, this became the defining controversy of the character. And even though it was controversial, it was intentional by Snyder, as it was a reflection of his inexperience as a hero. In his next appearance, the weight of global perception pushes him even further into doubt. He is treated as a god amongst men, feared as much as he is worshipped. The world questions whether an alien can truly belong, and Superman himself begins questioning whether his actions are driven by morality or by the need to justify his existence. This interpretation ultimately functions as a deconstruction. Snyder asks a central question: what would Superman actually look like in our world? A world where absolute goodness feels unrealistic. And by the end of it, this Superman feels closer to an Elseworld interpretation, similar in spirit to darker alternates like Injustice Superman, rather than the traditional aspirational hero. And when the tonal correction arrives later through Joss Whedon's version of Justice League, for many fans, it already felt too late.
You're all too weak to see the truth.
Well, I believe in truth, but I'm also a big fan of justice.
To this day, audiences remain divided on whether this portrayal truly understood Superman or fundamentally misunderstood him. Even now, with the new interpretation arriving under James Gunn, debate around Snyder's Superman refuses to die, because more than any version before him, this Superman forced audiences to confront a difficult question. Do we want Superman as he is, or only as we remember him? James Gunn's Superman is a unique taste, as it attempts to bring together elements from 3 different generations of Superman and refine them into something new. Whether it succeeds in doing that or not is ultimately up to the audience experiencing it. Released on July 11, 2025 and starring David Corenswet as the new Superman, the movie stands as one of the first major DC projects following the studio reboot announced in 2023, effectively serving as the tonal reset for Superman on the big screen. The intention here is clear: a return to the heart, optimism, and sense of wonder Superman has always represented, a deliberate step back towards simpler storytelling, a time when heroism wasn't treated as naive or unrealistic, but as something genuinely inspirational. Visually, this begins with his suit. The classic Superman look returns, and he's updated with more modern aesthetics, but unapologetically embracing tradition. Yes, I mean the trunks. Much like in Christopher Reeve's Superman, the film doesn't shy away from it, because this version exists in a fully fantastical world where superheroes have always been present. So in a universe filled with extraordinary beings, the idea of a man wearing a trunk suddenly doesn't feel ridiculous. It simply just feels like it belongs and makes sense. One of the biggest narrative changes, however, comes from Superman's Kryptonian heritage. Instead of being sent purely as Earth's savior, this version reveals that his biological parents intended something far darker, positioning him as a potential conqueror meant to rule if necessary and clap as many checks as possible if he's opposed. And while this revelation devastates Superman internally, it ultimately becomes the defining test of his character, because this Superman is not defined by destiny, but by choice. Paul Kent reinforces this idea very much clearly. What makes Superman who he is isn't just what Krypton expects of him, but the decision he makes every single day. He chooses kindness, he chooses restraint, he chooses to help simply because helping is the right thing to do. A philosophy deeply reminiscent of Reeve's portrayal. This Superman willingly put himself in danger to save everyone, sometimes even something as small as a squirrel, emphasizing compassion over spectacle. And while the film shows him getting beaten down far more than the audiences expected, something that drew criticisms from viewers who saw him as weaker, that vulnerability appears intentional. Because according to Gunn's interpretation, Superman's humanity shines brightest not when he wins effortlessly, but when he keeps standing back up. And in many ways, that becomes the synthesis of every Superman before him.
And that's my greatest strength.
You know, there may be far more to discuss. Honestly, I believe there is. Deeper philosophical readings and thematic layers that could be explored. But to my admittedly low-brained understanding, none of these Supermen are necessarily wrong in how they portray the character. They are simply different answers to the same question. Some portray Superman as an untouchable ideal, a symbol of virtue and moral perfection. Others frame him as a reluctant outsider struggling to find purpose while balancing alien identity with human belongings. And others lean into his humanity, presenting him as relatable, a man dealing with very human struggles despite possessing godlike powers. Each generation reflects what its world needed Superman to be at that moment in time. So, which version fits Superman perfectly for you? What is your favorite interpretation across these 4 generations of the character? Let me know down in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future uploads, or honestly, just to help grow the channel. But until next time, I'm out.